Well, hello, how are you? It's just gone 9 o'clock here in Portstewart in Northern Ireland, and we're still in lockdown here. And as you know, every evening at this time, I've been reading chapters from my memoirs. And at this stage, we're up to the third book, All Grown Up. And each evening, I'm reading a different chapter from the book. And tonight, I'm reading, would you believe we are up to chapter 14 already? Chapter 14 of All Grown Up. And it's entitled New Romantic. So, for those of you who have been asking me when we're going to hear more about the lovely Leslie from up the country, well, here we go. There's plenty, plenty more about that. It's all about romance tonight. So, no doubt I'll be hitting a redner at some stage. So, yeah, if you want to say hello in the chat, just give me a shout and I'll stop in the middle and I'll say hello to you. So, this is chapter 14, New Romantic. I was a new romantic, so I was. When I first started out at university, I was only pretending. Simon Le Bon would have laughed at my feeble efforts. Now that I was more than halfway through my second year, though I was completely mature and free to buy and wear whatever clothes I wanted without my mummy's approval, I was no longer dependent on the limited availability of pilot jumpsuits or East German army jackets paid over 20 weeks from the Great Universal Club book. It was the 1980s, and my tablecloth scarf, combat trousers, suede ankle boots, and leg warmers were the height of cool. Of course, I didn't go to the extremes of frilly shirts, eyeliner, and lipstick, as this was too expensive to achieve on a student grant and too androgynous to avoid the risk of getting your head kicked in Belfast. I had plenty of hair, though, back then, and I decided to make the most of it with the assistance of many tubes of hair gel from Boots Chemist. After many hours of practice in front of the mirror, I managed to construct a hairstyle of Duran Duran proportions. I didn't care for the sort of floppy fringe sported by Byron Drake, even though it made him look like the lead singer in the Human League, so I concentrated on height and volume on the top of my head and length at the back. To achieve this, I limited my visits to his and hers hairdressers on the Shankill Road, so my locks would grow long and thick enough to support a hairdo worthy of an appearance on Top of the Pops. Some days my hair was as impressive as one of the wild boys in the Duran Duran video, where Simon Le Bon was strapped on a spinning windmill and his head got dunked beneath the water with each revolution. This was a brilliant video with fire and trampolines and dancing and monsters. I wished I'd had the resources to make a video like this on my course, even if it did have to be set on a beach. When I raved about this post-apocalyptic mini-movie to my big brother, he made it clear he did not approve of my newfound new romanticism. Pity they didn't stop turning the windmill when that big fruit's head was under the water, he remarked. When I boasted to Billy Barton that my hair looked as trendy as one of the wild boys from Duran Duran video, he was not impressed either. Sure, that's nothing, he said. There's been a queer lot of wild boys running round Bushmills for years. Of course, new romanticism wasn't just about clothes and hair. It was also a brilliant new form of pop music. I bought cassettes by great new bands such as the Thompson Twins, who had three members, one black, one female, and one ginger, none of whom were actually related. I bought a cassette by Tears for Fears, who sang a really, really dark and really, really deep song about living in a very, very mad world. Tears for Fears were so cool and big heard that I tried very hard to appreciate the album tracks that I didn't really like. I had to come to realise that an intellectual has to make an effort to appreciate art that most people don't instantly enjoy, like Bob Dylan songs and modern art paintings that were almost Nietzschean. Never before in the history of pop music had there been so many bands using synthesizers and electric drums. It used to be just Kraftwerk and Gary Newman and Jean-Michel Jarre, but now everyone was playing electro pop. I sometimes played along on my stylophone until the batteries went dead. My father had once kept up to date with the latest technology by purchasing a shiny new portable radio and cassette with speakers built into the front and extra buttons to turn up the bass. Apparently, the nickname for this new type of stereo player was a ghetto blaster, but to me that sounded more like the name for a petrol bomb. In America, they called it a boombox, but that still sounded much too explosive for me. This latest technological innovation was suitably silver and space age and looked just like the one your woman used when she couldn't stop dancing in Flashdance. I borrowed the Ghetto Blaster one Sunday night, and after that, it remained with me in Coleraine. I bought the new Hard Jones cassette with my student grant and played What Is Love with the volume turned up full in an attempt to lessen the pain of having to do the dishes in our student flat every 2 months. I played my Hard Jones cassette so many times that it got stuck when I tried to rewind it, and I had to take it out of the Ghetto Blaster and rewind it with a pencil. As the 1980s gathered pace, the makeup and clothes became more and more outrageous, just like the shoulder pads and plot lines in Dynasty and Dallas. It was definitely the era of the shoulder pad soap opera. Margaret Thatcher and Nancy Reagan even had a friendly shoulder pad competition when Maggie visited Ronald Reagan in America to build their special relationship and give the Soviets a hard time. Conor O'Neill said that new romanticism was a disgusting display of excess and indulgence typical of Thatcher's Britain, and naturally blamed it all on that woman. I'll continue in a wee minute. I'll get into the romance in a wee minute. Now we've done the new romantics, but I'll say hello. Hi, Jim Poole. Lovely to have you along. Hi, Colin and Ellen. Colin and Helen Stewart, who were students with me back in the day, who'll probably remember all this. Lovely to have you along live. Colin and Helen. Colin shared a house with me, indeed. Very good. Lovely to have you. Hi, Evelyn Brown. Lovely to have you. A regular. And also Anne Kirk. Good to have you along again, Anne. And Marlene Williams, another regular. Hello, Norma Fleming. Me again. Yes, I know. You never miss. And Betty O'Riordan, too. Back for my fix, says Anne writing. Cool. Hope you enjoy it. Hi, Neve Sahafian. Lovely to have you along. And Roberta Robinson Curran, another regular. Hi, Karen McLean. Hope you're doing well. Evening, Angela and Keith. Never missed Angela and Keith Montgomery. Hope you enjoyed tonight. You're early tonight, Laura Hughes. Glad you're live with me tonight. That's brilliant. And Naba Grace, I think in Uganda. Yes, thank you for joining us. Glory to God, indeed. And Aline Bonner, good evening. Another one who never misses. Good to have you all with me. I'm going to continue the story of being a real romantic as a student. This is about 1983, 84 now. Of course, now that I had a real live girlfriend, I had to learn to be a true romantic as well as a new romantic. I discovered that girls love to receive nice romantic presents from their boyfriends rather than anything too utilitarian, such as oven gloves or a duster. Of course, as a feminist, I would never have insulted Leslie with such stereotypically gendered gifts, so I bought her a pink cuddly dog for Valentine's Day, which she loved and put on top of the wardrobe in her bedroom. For Christmas, I gave her the gift of a panda rug from the British Home Stores, although for some reason this present elicited less enthusiasm. When I decided to buy Leslie jewellery for the first time, I saved money by skimping on beans on toast for weeks. A gift of jewellery was an indication of true love, so it was very important to get it right. I secretly researched what type of jewellery Leslie liked the most by asking a Heather or two about her preference of precious metals. They told me that she preferred three-colour gold, which was the latest big thing, and I decided to buy Leslie an expensive three-colour gold locket in the shape of a heart. The locket opened so you could put a photograph of yourself inside for your girlfriend so she could gaze upon you at any time, day or night. This exclusive gift would have to be sourced in one of the finest jewellers in Belfast. So that weekend, I travelled home, made my way into Belfast city centre, and after a full body search at the security gates, proceeded to Argos. I had to queue for ages, but when I eventually got to the front of the line, I was able to look up the jewellery section in the catalogue and fill in an order form with the wee biro on a chain, like my big brother did when he put a bet on in the bookies. Then I made my way to the cash desk. "Where's your wee slip, love?" inquired the purveyor of fine jewellery at the cash register. She pressed some buttons on an amazing new kind of computer that instantly checked if the product was available. Argos was like an instant Great Universal Club book. "You're in luck, love. It's in stock," she announced. I wrote my biggest cheque since paying the deposit on my student flat and handed it over. "You can collect it over there in a wee minute, son," the cashier advised, pointing to a long counter lined with cardboard boxes. I waited as a small man collected a new strimmer to tidy up his lawn. A fat woman picked up her Jane Fonda's workout video, and a mother with two noisy children waited impatiently for a My Little Pony doll with a unicorn horn. After everyone else's boxes had been delivered from the warehouse upstairs, I stood alone and began to fret that the necklace had been out of stock after all. "Are you getting?" inquired the lady at the collection desk. "No," I replied. "Where's your wee slip, love?" I presented her with a copy of my order, and she disappeared into the warehouse, returning with a small plastic bag. A small plastic bag containing the exquisite locket and a stainless steel toilet brush for the customer behind me. "The bug brush and the wee necklace," she announced. I rushed forward to claim the precious gift. "You're dead lucky, wee fella," she explained. "They're going that cheap. This is the last one, so it is." The Coleraine Palladium became a regular romantic rendezvous for me and the lovely Leslie. I held her hands to keep them warm when the superstar at the front of the cinema flickered and ran out of gas before the interval, and the staff had to change the gas tank as well as the film reel. My gold adorned lover and I cuddled through the most romantic classics of the year, such as Psycho 2, which was really, really dark, and Jaws 3D, which was really, really deep, and Breakdance 2, Electric Boogaloo, which was really, really crap. We were as happy as Charles and Diana on tour in Australia, except I had no money and Leslie's dresses were from Anderson Macaulay's in Royal Avenue rather than Harvey Nichols in Kensington. However, the colossal class divide between me and Leslie was never far from my mind. Our backgrounds were so different. When I had been delivering newspapers for Oil Mac up the Shankill, Leslie had been riding ponies for a stud farm in Kildare. Only a few years ago, while I was working as a bread boy on the Ormo mini shop on the Peace Line in Belfast, Leslie had been preparing triangular cheese and tomato sandwiches for supper at the Presbyterian Women's Flower Festival in Balachi. These social and cultural differences threatened to come between us on more than one occasion. When Leslie arrived at university one Sunday night after driving a brand new blue Renault 5, which she named Rocky after Sylvester Stallone, I was shocked at the extent of her wealth and resources. All I had was a rickety bike with a broken radio. Even my father's green Simca looked pathetic compared to Leslie's Renault 5. It was like comparing Gary Ewing's house in Knott's Landing to South Fork Ranch, where JR lived, in Dallas. "Well, what do you think of my new car? Isn't it gorgeous?" she said with the proudest of Balaki whoops. I paused, swallowed, and put on what Leslie called my self-righteous bake. "Have you ever thought about how many starving children you could feed for the cost of that car?" I replied sullenly. "Oh, stop you being so jealous, wee fella," and come on with me and we'll give it a good hook down the Agerton Road. You've no idea, she continued, completely unassailed by my socialist critique. Clive Ross made it clear that he too disapproved of Leslie's worldly materialism, although his reproach was less direct and came in the form of a prayer at the Bible study meeting in his freezing flat. Dear Lord, we humbly beseech you to challenge us to give up our material possessions for the sake of others and for the sake of the gospel, he prayed. Yes, Lord, Tara Grace agreed, raising both hands heavenward with pure serenity. I gave Leslie a dig in the arm. Forgive us for putting money and clothes and new cars before you, Lord. Yes, Lord, repeated Tara on the brink of breaking into tongues. There was only one person in the room with a new car. I gave Leslie another dig in the arm. We both opened our eyes before the amens and shared a wee wink. My first trip in the new Renault 5 was across the border to Dublin for a student leadership training conference. It was a long drive down the M1 past the Maze, which was Protestant for Long Kesh, where the IRA escaped, through the army checkpoint on the border where you're worried you might get blown up, across the border into bandit country where you're worried you might get shot by a sniper, on into Dundalk and across the River Boyne where King Billy won, down through all the wee towns with colourful shops in the main streets, through Drogheda with the bridge and the big chapels, until finally we reached the traffic jams in Dublin. It was a long journey, so we stopped in one of the wee towns to change our pounds into punts, to buy petrol and love hearts and a bag of chocolate eclair sweeties and several packets of Tayto crisps. We both agreed that Tayto in the south never tasted as nice as in the north, despite the fact that the bags looked almost the same. Every time we passed a field of animals, Leslie whooped, "Och, look at the lovely wee lambsies! Oh, look, I bet you that wee donkey's a character! Oh, my nerves! The stallion over there is gorgeous!" "Why, thank you," I replied. The whole way down to Dublin, we played cassettes or listened to the radio, turning up the volume for all the best songs. Going down the Dublin road wasn't half as bad as Ian Paisley always made it out to be. I wound down the car window and sang along to Wham's Bad Boys as we sped through the hills of Newry. When we crossed the border, I switched to RTE2, which was a sort of Catholic BBC Radio 1. Larry Gogan played Sunday Bloody Sunday by U2 and we sang along even though we were Protestants, because I heard Bono was a proper pacifist like me. I played drums on the dashboard to The Eye of the Tiger the whole way down O'Connell Street, past a real McDonald's that wasn't allowed up north, and the old post office with all the bullet holes. Leslie put on her James Taylor's greatest hits and held my hand during You Got a Friend, like a true new romantic. Of course, Leslie did most of the driving because she said I didn't know what to do with a car. I agreed that she should drive as a feminist statement because it was normally the man who was supposed to drive the woman, and I wanted to challenge gender stereotypes, and I didn't want to crash her new car. My limited driving skills were often a point of discussion among my fellow students who all agreed that I was probably safer on a bike. On the way home from the fair city, I fell asleep. I dreamt that I was Michael Knight driving a brand new Knight Rider, an artificially intelligent, computerized car that spoke to me in an American accent, and Leslie was Dr. Bonnie Barstow with the dark hair and the lovely eyes. However, just as I was about to stop an evil Russian from setting off an atomic bomb in California, I was woken by the sound of Leslie speaking. "Do you want to stop for a wee see?" she said seductively. I required no further encouragement. Within minutes, Leslie had pulled into a lay-by for changing her flat tyres, and we were locked in a passionate embrace, our bodies separated only by the gear stick and the handbrake. But just as we were really getting into it, Leslie backed away from me suddenly. "Oh, my nerves!" she shrieked. "What's wrong?" "You've ruined my Gloria Vanderbilt." What? What are you like, wee boy? What? We're friggin' plastered! I looked down to discover that I'd been lying on the bag of chocolate eclair sweeties as I slept, and they'd melted all over my brand new white t-shirt. There were unpleasant looking brown stains across where it said Choose Life on the front, the same as George Michael's in Wham. I had opted for a t-shirt with a nice clean message this time instead of Frankie Says Relax. Radio 1 had banned Frankie Goes to Hollywood because apparently Relax was about sex or being gay or something. A George Michael t-shirt seemed much more sensible and heterosexual to me. At some stage mid-snog, my trendy t-shirt ended up getting minging because the melted chocolate on my t-shirt had then transferred onto Leslie's good white Princess Diana blouse from Anderson Macaulay's, and now she was covered in unsightly brown stains. Her blouse had a designer label in the shape of a swan, which now looked as if it was pooping inappropriately. "You have no idea!" Leslie shrieked. We drove another mile or two down the road and stopped in a car park near Banbridge, a town with a proper nightclub called the Coach. We got out at the side of the road and used tissue paper and Leslie's makeup remover to wipe the brown stains off my George Michael and her Gloria Vanderbilt. A British Army Land Rover sped past, splashing water from a puddle all over my good jeans, and I was sure I heard someone with an English accent shout, "Shat yourself, mate!" Brits, I thought. Marty Mullen would have been proud of me. I continued to use my second-hand bike from Smithfield Market as my main mode of transport in the final weeks of my second year. When the sun came out and the exams began, I studied hard to keep up my 2-1, which was like a B at A level. I cycled to and from the university for all my exams, rhythmically reciting facts about the history of mass communications with every push of the pedals. The summer holidays were on the way, and I was enjoying living by the seaside and beside Morelli's. On sunny days, the students flocked to the beach. My fellow virgins had a Christian barbecue with hamburgers and sausages and sang Majesty on one sand dune, while my fellow Shakespearean actors opted for marijuana, Morrissey and Nookie on a neighbouring sand dune. I had managed to make my student grant last until the end of term, and I was looking forward to signing on the dole with everyone else in Snugville Street and having some money for my summer holidays. I was also looking forward to volunteering for a charitable summer scheme on the Antrim Road led by the Reverend Patrick Traynor, a ginger minister who had radical views on the church helping poor people in the inner city. But on the day of my feminism exam, all of my positive end of term feelings were shattered. I had just left the Diamond, where I had written several excellent essays about the media being unfair to women, blaming the BBC and Margaret Thatcher. I was looking forward to a pleasant cycle back to Portstewart in the sunshine, and I was planning to meet Leslie, some Heathers, and a few other friends for an end of term poke on the prom. My bicycle was locked safely in the bicycle shed under the central building, and once I hopped on my saddle, I would be heading for the seaside within minutes. I was not prepared for the crime scene that awaited me in the bike shed. I couldn't believe my eyes. My rickety bike was still locked securely to a pole, but the wheels were gone. The saddle was gone. The light was gone. Even the wee basket I used for carrying my books was gone. It had all been stolen by some wee tea leaf from Coleraine. All that remained was the frame, the pedals, and the oily chain that fell off every 2 miles. My shock turned to anger, and I kicked the wall of the bike shed so hard that I stubbed my toe and had to limp to the bus stop to try to hitch a lift. It wasn't fair. This bike had been my most expensive possession in the whole world, apart from my collection of ABBA albums. What use would anyone have for a saddle and a couple of wheels from a second-hand bike from Smithfield Market? I had been as much a victim of spite as of theft, I decided. When I arrived in Portstewart, Leslie was most understanding, and she gave me a hug and bought me a Knickerbocker Glory in Morelli's. "Hey boy, what's the crack, hey?" asked Billy Barton. I ignored Billy's question, as this was a situation devoid of crack. "I locked my bike in the bike shed and some hallion stole the wheels off it," I said. Tara Grace offered to pray that the thieves would repent and return my wheels under the conviction of the Holy Spirit. And Clive Ross explained that this was God's way of teaching me to be less dependent on material goods and more dependent on the Lord. "It was desperate, so it was," I lamented. It was just sitting there with no wheels nor nothing. It was just a shell, like one of them there DeLoreans in the closed down factory in Belfast. Aaron Ward was somewhat less sympathetic and burst into laughter at the description of my forlorn wheelless bicycle. "Oh, aye, but if it was your middle-class car that got nicked, you'd be laughing on the other side of your face, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you?" I barked. This just made him laugh even more. Leslie said that Aaron and I argued like an old married couple, even though we'd only lived together for 2 years now. The trauma of losing my bicycle triggered an impulse that I had kept under control for several years. As a teenager, I had developed a habit of purchasing pets that inevitably lived very short lives. As a result, you heard all about that in Bread Boy. As a result, there was a substantial pet cemetery in our back garden beside the greenhouse where my father grew tomatoes and killed greenfly. Up until this point, I had resisted the urge to buy any of the helpless creatures in the Coleraine pet shop, even though I was a regular visitor and often tempted. But the distress of losing my bike had driven me over the edge. I should have known better. After all, I was nearly 20 years old now and not a gormless teenager anymore. I had lost so many previous pets to premature death, I sometimes imagined that when I walked into the pet shop, the parrots would squawk in a Scottish accent like your man in Dad's Army on BBC One. "We're all doomed, Captain Mannering, we're all doomed." So the next day, I went in to Coleraine and bought a hamster and a cage with a squeaky wheel and a wee bottle for him to drink from. I named my new pet Buffy, and everyone said he was dead cute, even though he bit a heather from Portadown on the finger. I used the remainder of my student grant to stock up on straw and sunflower seeds to feed him, and a huge plastic bag of sawdust to line the bottom of his cage. Deep down, I knew all of this was a mistake, and certain to end in tragedy. Previous experience suggested that the poor wee creature was condemned. We lived together happily for the last few weeks of term, our relationship blighted only by the incessant squeaking of his exercise wheel during the night, which continued even after I applied Flora-Margarine to the mechanics of the wheel. However, history was determined to repeat itself, like an election in Northern Ireland. Poor Buffy developed a sore ear and began to fall over as he tried to run around his cage. At first it seemed that he had merely developed a mild case of hamster vertigo, possibly caused by the overenthusiastic use of his wheel through the wee small hours of every single night. But when I noticed that his condition had deteriorated to the extent that he could no longer stand up, I ran to the telephone box to call Leslie. She responded immediately, turning the Renault 5 into an animal ambulance and transporting me and my patient to the vet in Coleraine. "Don't worry, Tony," Leslie said reassuringly. "Sure, you've been looking after the wee creature really well. He'll be all right, so he will." Leslie loved animals and talked about her ponies and dogs and wee banties, which I thought meant birds, with great affection. So I knew she would be horrified to learn that nearly every pet I had ever owned had come to a premature end. If she found out I was an animal assassin, she would chuck me for sure. So I had no choice but to keep this dark secret to myself. Leslie held my hand in the waiting room and joined Buffy and me in the consultation cubicle as if she was one of his family. The vet looked most concerned over his half-rimmed glasses. I had the urge to ask him the question Captain James T. Kirk had always asked Dr. McCoy in such dire circumstances. What are his chances, Bones? But I didn't need to. The vet shook his head and explained that Buffy had a terminal tic. As Leslie gripped my hand, the vet gave the devastating verdict that it would be kinder to put Buffy to sleep. I was shocked, not so much that yet another one of my pets lacked longevity, but that for the first time I had decided to end the animal's life. At least all the others had simply died of natural causes or unfortunate accidents, apart from the gerbil and the snake, who had died together in a fight to the death. But that's another story. This was euthanasia. We had discussed this moral dilemma in tutorials, but this was real. As a pacifist, I could not possibly countenance the termination of a life. Leslie could tell that I was struggling with the ethics of this dilemma. It would be cruel to keep the wee creature alive, she said gently. I nodded, and the vet took this as assent. Buffy was gassed, and I was upset, and I vowed never to buy another pet for as long as I lived. As I considered the prospect of moving into my third and final year at university, I was amazed that time had passed so quickly. The university bosses had decided to change the name from the new University of Ulster to simply the University of Ulster. Just like my student career, the university officially wasn't going to be new anymore. It seemed like only yesterday that I'd gone to my first lecture, played my first game of Frogger, and watched my first film noir. For my final year, I had agreed to move into a new house in Millbank Avenue with Aaron and two new friends, Peter from Hollywood, who liked U2 and prayer, and Colin from Scotland, who liked Robbie Burns and rugby. Our new accommodation was the same rent, but about 1 degree warmer than the fridge I'd shivered in for the past year, and it had an open fire like my granny's, which you could light with newspaper, sticks, and wet coal. Once the summer was over, we would be moving into our new digs. I would be studying for finals and starting to look for a job and thinking about life after university. I was going to be a proper mature student. So I was. So there you have it. That's chapter 14 of All Growed Up. I'll just say hello to a few more people. Where was I? Let me see. Yes. Hi, Ruth. Greetings from Banbridge, says Ruth Watts. Oh, Banbridge got a wee mention tonight, Ruth. That's where the incident with the chocolate eclairs happened. McDonald's in Dublin, says Susan Craig. Thanks for the memory. Do you remember? It was a big deal. We drove to Dublin for a burger because there was no McDonald's in Northern Ireland. Milkshakes and Big Macs. Betty O'Riordan, I'm almost choking here laughing about the chocolate eclairs. Michael McKinley Sr., saying it's a romantic chapter, I've taken the earpieces out and let the wife Joyce listen in. I hope she enjoyed it, Michael. Norma Harrison's laughing. Neve's a bit sad to think about my wee hamster. Evening, Susan Wilgar. Good laugh, great laugh tonight. Tony says, Orla O'Sullivan. Thanks for listening, Orla. Hope all the O'Sullivans are well. And thanks, Evelyn Brown and Nigel McComb in Oz and Marlene Williamson. Lovely to have you all with me this evening. I'll be back tomorrow night where we'll be up to chapter 15 of All Grew Up. Until then, wherever you are in the world, stay safe, stay well, and stay positive.